Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Can you hear me at the back okay? Okay, good. So I really want to thank you all for coming out. I know that it's a terrible, terrible night. The weather's not great, it's pretty cold. So I really appreciate you all turning up this evening. What I want to talk to you about is some of the work that I've been doing, how I kind of accidentally became a rocket scientist, and some of the things that I'm currently working on. So without further ado, this, yeah, aren't I cute? I know, I had to put this on. This has nothing to do with anything, but I just think I'm the cutest baby, just to put that out there. So I grew up on a small island off the coast of Britain called Portsea Island, and that fact will become relevant again shortly. And I was always interested in science, even from an early age. So these are pictures from when I was in what we call infant school, so I was about 5 in these pictures. This is me looking after my frogs. I am the frog monitor in my class, and I'm very proud of being frog monitor. This is a little girl who's messing with my frogs, and I'm giving her the evil eye. And this is the class mischief maker who's just about to come in and receive my other elbow. So I distinctly remember being the frog monitor, being very protective and really, really enjoying looking after the frogs. The other scientific achievement that I had when I was 5 was we had a science competition in our class. And so this is our class, or some of our class. This is our teacher. This one is me. And you'll notice the beautiful large plant that I'm holding. See, these two killed their plants. And this is the plant that this one grew. And this one wrote about plants. Clearly, you can see the winner of the science competition right here. So even from an early age, I was interested in science. Now remember the frog, because the frog's going to come back later on. One of the things that I loved, I grew up on this island, and the island is in the background. This is Portsmouth, and this is taken from the Isle of Wight, so this is another island. One of the things that I loved when I was a small child was the hovercraft. This is a hovercraft. It makes the trip between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight many times a day, and when I was a kid, this was the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. Amazing, right? It goes on land, it goes on water, it puffs up, it lets itself down, it moves so quickly. I loved this thing. Begged my parents to go on it. First went on it when I was about 35, and it was much more of a letdown because I went on the one that goes from Dover to Calais and takes your cars. So you put your cars in the middle and you can sit around the outside. But it was so cool. It was something to do with science, my parents explained, but I just knew it was cool. So that was another thing that I was really interested in. So this is my education. I went to Portsmouth Southern Grammar School for girls, so an all-girls school. That was my high school. Then I went to the University of Exeter, as Chanel mentioned, and I did an undergraduate degree in mathematics and then a PhD in engineering. And I was very interested in mathematics. I loved mathematics, but I had met somebody in the engineering department who was really a mathematician working in an engineering department. And when you do a PhD in Britain, you have to apply, and there are a certain number of PhDs available in the country, and you have to apply for that one and be accepted. And so I applied for several, but the one that I was accepted for was at Exeter, and I really wanted to work with this guy, so I ended up staying there and working on my PhD as well. And in a minute, I'll talk about what I did. So what I study is aeroacoustics. This is what I studied for my PhD, and this is what I'm still working on to this day. So aeroacoustics is basically the study of jet noise. So we're all familiar with different types of jet noise. Here's, for example, a rocket launch. Whoops, if I can capture it. There we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. So I'm interested in what what makes that noise and why is it like it is and what can we do about it? Why do we need to do anything about it? I'll talk about that a little later. This is the other sort of thing I'm interested in. And I was interested in airplane noise because the University of Exeter was right under the flight path for Concorde. And so Concorde would come out of London Heathrow at about 10 o'clock at night, it would be flying over Exeter. And that was just the point when it went supersonic. And so every night, regular as clockwork, at 10 o'clock, there would be this huge sonic boom, and everything in the house would shake. You could feel it, you could hear it. So again, this was fascinating to me. I didn't know what it was about, but it was interesting. After I left Exeter, I worked with Jaguar Cars, so this was incredibly exciting. Jaguar Cars at the time was a small private British firm. They were making these fabulous, fabulous cars, and I worked on the AJ26 engine with them. So we were working on the engine reliability, and I got to make lots of trips to Jaguar to see the cars. They used to bring out the new car designs. It was fascinating to me. It was a whole world I knew nothing about, because they would bring out the new car designs, and the cars would be shrouded in pieces of plastic because there would be journalists up trees trying to get pictures of the new designs. And so to keep them secret, they would have to take them out with bits of plastic shrouding the shape. They took all the instrumentation out to take them on the test track. They would take us around the test track, even though they probably weren't supposed to. It was fabulous. I had a great time working with them. I also worked a little bit with Rolls-Royce. So I worked in the case of Rolls-Royce, not with the car engines, but with the aircraft engines. And again, that was a terrifically exciting opportunity. Now, what I study is the Coanda effect. And you've all seen this in many examples, or an effect similar to the Coanda effect. It's what happens when, if you turn on the tap, the faucet, and run the water, and then you put a spoon underneath. And if you bring it in slowly, you'll see that the water comes and sticks itself to the spoon and goes around the spoon. And so it follows the surface of the spoon. It's the same effect that when you're trying to pour something out of a jug or a pitcher, and it all comes round the spout and then runs down the side. It's that annoying effect that you get then. So those are examples of the Coanda effect. It was discovered by Henri Coanda, who was a Romanian engineer and mathematician. He discovered the effect in 1910, completely by accident. He was working on designing the first jet aircraft, and he was working at about the same time, or a little bit later than the Wright brothers. And he thought perfected his jet aircraft, and so he took it to an exposition in Paris, and he was showing off his aircraft, and he was making some final adjustments. And he looked at it and he thought that towards the back it wasn't very aerodynamic seeming. It seemed like there were some rough edges that he should do something about. So he took a little piece of metal and he attached it to the back of his airplane to kind of smooth out the rough edges. And what he accidentally did was he caused the exhaust from the jet engine to follow this curved surface and be pulled up onto the wooden fuselage of his plane. So this didn't end very well. So he puts this thing in to be aerodynamic, he fixes it up, he gets the plane ready to go. He's not a pilot, but he accidentally pushes the on switch when he's messing about with something else. So the plane starts to move, so he jumps in, even though he's not a pilot. This seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess. So he jumps into the plane, he starts to fly it, not very well, because he's not a pilot. He smells burning. He looks round, the back of the plane's on fire because he's discovered this effect that the exhaust has followed this curved surface and set fire to the fuselage. So he's so busy looking round, wondering what to do about the flames, that he flies into a wall. So it was kind of it's not the kind of cool story. You want to say, oh look, I discovered this effect, or I invented this thing. You don't really want it to be that kind of story. But it was in his case. But he had discovered that when a jet of fluid is passed over a curved surface, it bends to follow the surface. And this is the effect that I've been studying for a number of years now, the Coanda effect. And so I'm going to show you a demonstration of the Coanda effect using smoke. So what's going to happen is that smoke is going to come out of here. This is a fan, and the fan is blowing horizontally. So the fan will be blowing out here and out here. And so the smoke that's coming down should blow this way and this way. But it's not going to because of the Coanda effect. So let me play this quick demonstration for you and you'll see what I'm talking about. So you can see it's flowing around here. Instead of the flow coming out horizontally as it's supposed to, it's sticking to the surface and flowing around the curved surface. And so this is the effect known as the Coanda effect, and it's got a lot of benefits, a lot of advantages, and a lot of disadvantages, and that's what makes it so interesting for a scientist to study. So before I talk about what we've been doing, you see the Coanda effect in a lot of places. It's actually deliberately applied in a lot of places, and then it actually occurs in a lot of places as well. So places where it's deliberately applied are in race cars. They use the Coanda effect. They can control the air being sucked along the curved surfaces, which makes the cars go faster. The stealth bomber is another thing that uses the Coanda effect because it uses it to generate increased lift. The bombardier beetle is a different case. The bombardier beetle is a case where the Coanda effect occurs and is used to this guy's advantage. And so what happens is that this nasty looking stuff is actually a poisonous secretion that the bombardier beetle has as its defense mechanism. So what it does is it shoots this stuff onto anything that approaches it that it thinks is an enemy and poisons it. But the Coanda effect part, the interesting part, is that it can actually aim. It uses the Coanda effect and the shape of its behind to move its behind, and it knows that the jet will follow it, and it is deadly in terms of its aim. It's absolutely unbelievable. This thing can use its behind and aim this jet really accurately. It's absolutely incredible. It's one of those science experiments that's really kind of fun to do. Put the beetle down and then move things around it and watch the beetle moving its behind. It's just the kind of science that everybody loves, right? This is the lenticular. This was an invention of Henri Coanda that was picked up on by the Germans during the Second World War. And this flying saucer-like thing was something that they wanted to capitalize on, but it never ended up being entirely viable for a whole bunch of reasons. This is where I've been working. I started off working with BP when they were popular, before Deepwater Horizon and things like that. So this was in the 1980s in Britain, and I was working on the thing called the Coanda flare, which is this thing in the middle. This is me up the ladder messing about with this thing. And the Coanda flare is a thing that they have on oil rigs for burning off the excess gas. So on an oil rig, you have to have this flame. Whenever you see a picture of an oil rig, there's always a flame, because the oil rig has to have, it's like a pilot light, it has to have this flame on constantly, so that if you suddenly need to burn off large amounts of gas, if there's an emergency, you can just push up the pressure and the flame's already on, and you can just burn off gas quickly and immediately and avoid the danger. So all these oil rigs have these flares on them. And they're also on onshore processing sites. So this is actually in the north of England where the North Sea gas comes in, and they have these things burning there as well. And the problem is that they're very noisy, and this is a byproduct of the Coanda effect. So the Coanda effect, they used to use these things that were like Bunsen burners. They looked like this, and they just piped the gas at high pressure and it came out and burned. The problem with these things is the flame is very unstable. So if you get a high wind and you're on an oil rig and there's a big flame, you could be in big trouble. This is not something you want, not a quality you want on an oil rig, an unstable flame. So they said there must be a better way, and in the 1960s they employed the Coanda effect, and they said, well, what about if we pump the gas up round here? So there's an annular exit slot and not an exit slot in here. The gas comes out of here, and instead of going straight out, because of the Coanda effect, it follows the surface. And they discovered that when they did that, and they ignited it, they lit it about here, you could get an incredibly stable flame. So the flame will go this way, and if you bend the flame will go this way, and if you bend it here, it'll go here. So it was much, much safer and much better. What happens when the gas is turning is that you get air sucked in from here. So the ambient air is sucked in as the gas turns. And that means it burns with a very clean flame. You get a lot of oxygen in the burn. So that's what the increased entrainment means. You get this deflection. Because there's all this air and gas mixed in, you get a lot of turbulence. And that turbulence causes a lot of noise. And so that's where we came in. So my projects have all involved, the Coanda effect has these really great advantages, but nobody uses it as much as they could because there's all this noise associated with it. So I've always been interested in what can we do about the noise? Where is the noise coming from, and what can we do about it? If we can do something, we can use this Coanda effect to much greater degree. So that's what I've been involved with. So right now, we're doing some work here at JMU. This is an AEROACOUSTICS lab I have here at JMU. It's actually in the basement of Boris. I have currently 4 lab students working with me, and we're doing all sorts of projects related to Coanda flows, related to the Coanda jet, and we're also looking at some of the things related to the rockets that I'm going to talk about shortly. So this is our experimental setup. This is our lab. This pole here has our microphones. We have 4 microphones. This tiny little thing in here is this thing here. This is our flare, our model flare that we're experimenting on. And then this is an optical setup. And so the whole idea is that we're doing experiments by listening and watching at the same time. And our idea is that if we can watch what's going on and listen to what's going on, then we'll know when we hear certain things and see certain things that they're probably related. And that relationship will help us to build better mathematical models and better understand what's going on. So here are our microphones. We take recordings from each microphone when the gas is being blown around the flare. The recordings from the microphones are combined to give us a single recording, and we get lots and lots of data from that. These are our optical results. So this is the surface, the curved surface, and we can, by using density differences, we can, in a system of mirrors and a laser, we can look at the flow and we can see what's going on. And so, for example, here we can see that the flow, this is the nozzle, the flow comes out, it sticks to the surface. As we increase the pressure a little bit, it's still sticking, but it's doing something a bit more dodgy up here. And then suddenly, it's flip-flapping backwards and forwards. It's stopped sticking anymore. We've got a phenomenon called breakaway, and this effect continues. So our optical and our acoustical experiments can tell us a lot about what's going on with the noise. This is one of the things that we did invent when I was working with BP in the 1980s. We invented something called the sawtooth sleeve, which is this sawtooth thing here, this thing here. And again, this is us fitting it on. And that made the flare quieter. Actually, to be truthful, it didn't make it quieter, it changed the frequency. And that's one of the things that you can do in acoustics. It happened that the frequency that the flare was particularly noisy at was a frequency which was a resonant frequency to the human ear. And so one of the things you can do is you can reduce the noise or you can attenuate it. And attenuating means change the frequency and it doesn't seem as annoying. And that's what this did. So these are just some of the things that we've been doing. Okay, interesting, but not rocket science, right? Here's the rocket science. So 1926, Robert Goddard, who is the man in rocket science, launches the first liquid-fueled rocket. He'd been working on this for a number of years now. He launches it. It rises 41 feet, which by today's standards doesn't seem very exciting, but it's phenomenal in those days. It rises 41 feet and goes 184 feet in 2.5 seconds. So this is in 1926. So he continues to work on his rockets. He starts doing experiments in New Mexico, in Roswell, New Mexico, which he chooses because he says nobody is nosy, the neighbors aren't nosy, nobody wants to know about what he's doing, and if bits fall off his rockets, the chances they'll hit anyone are very small, which is as good a reason as any, I guess. So 1930 to 1941, he experiments on larger rockets. This is him carrying the nose cone of one of his rockets. And the rockets are going higher and faster all the time. 1957, the first rocket actually launches something into space. So it launches Sputnik. So Sputnik is a satellite, goes around the Earth for about 3 months. It emits this beeping sound, which people listen out for. People are actually hearing something that's coming from space. This is phenomenal. Now to us it seems like nothing. At the time this is a huge, huge thing. This thing is out there in space, it's going round and it's emitting something that we can hear. So this is 1957, and it seems like from 1926 to 1957 is kind of a long time and we haven't maybe gone that far. The next 4 years are critical, and within 4 years we've actually sent someone into space.
In the early morning of April the 11th, 1961, Major Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin waved goodbye to his wife and baby daughter and set off on a mission of great daring and a technological triumph. For days, rumors had been going round Moscow that something spectacular was being planned. Now, this 27-year-old Air Force pilot was about to make it happen. Gagarin was on his way to becoming the first human being to fly in space. His 4.5-ton Vostok spacecraft was put into orbit around the Earth at a height of 190 miles. It took just 89 minutes to complete. Then Gagarin fired his braking rockets, came down through the atmosphere and landed by parachute in Central Asia. He had proved that man could withstand prolonged periods of weightlessness, and he'd also survived the tremendous acceleration that no amount of testing could have foretold. News of his flight had been kept secret in case anything went wrong. When it finally emerged, the world was stunned. Gagarin arrived back from his historic flight to a hero's welcome. He'd been where no man had ventured before. He'd seen sights that no man had seen before. "The sky looks very dark," was one of his first comments, and he said he could see forests, cities, mountains and rivers all at the same time. And he was back, safe and sound. The crowds in Moscow couldn't wait to see him, and nor, of course, could the political leaders who claimed his exploit as a triumph for the Soviet system. Gagarin was sent off around the world as an unofficial Soviet ambassador. But the story has a sad end. Years later, testing a prototype fighter, Gagarin took off, apparently drunk, and died in a crash.
So this was the first man in space, and this had been a big thing. There'd been this big sort of space race between the Russians primarily and the Americans, and this continued throughout the 1960s. And in 1969, of course, the Americans were on top.
On July the 21st, 1969, the moon finally gave up some of the secrets man had dreamed about for centuries. The world had been anticipating the event for months. The Americans had been working on the moon landing for years. Now it was about to come to fulfillment. And President Kennedy explained why.
Why some say the moon? Why choose this as our goal? Why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago? Fly the Atlantic. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
3 astronauts were on board Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong, who'd be the first man down, Buzz Aldrin, who'd go with him, and Mike Collins, who'd be staying on board the spacecraft. The climax of the Apollo mission came 4 days after blastoff. So far the journey had been relatively uneventful. Now they were beginning to orbit the moon itself. Next, Armstrong and Aldrin transferred to the lunar module and fired their engine to start their descent to the surface of the moon. After a tense few minutes, when they had to avoid a boulder-filled crater with their fuel running low, they were finally down.
Roger in advance. We're go. Train tight. We're go. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Mode control, both auto, engine command override off. Engine arm off. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. I'm at the foot of the ladder. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The scientific value of the flight to the moon may not have been particularly great, but as an exercise in what the imagination of man can achieve with enough determination, knowledge and purpose, the moon landing was unsurpassed.
So this was phenomenal. It's hard to explain what a big event this was. I'd like to say I wasn't born then, but I was. And I remember as a very small child going to the neighbour's house. Nobody had a TV except our neighbours. And so we all went to our neighbour's house to watch this on TV. It was just absolutely unbelievable as far as we were concerned. everybody was excited. It's in all the newspapers, everybody's talking about it, conversations. I remember my parents talking about it, I remember all my friends talking about it. We did projects at school where we built the moon and built little astronauts. Well, not quite everybody. The Russians were a bit peeved. This is their newspaper. Everybody else's newspaper has it on the front page, front and center. They put it right down here. They have a story about the 20th year of communism in Poland. That's apparently up here. And then they have a story about their own lunar spacecraft, which was the loser. And then they have the story down here about the astronauts. So it's kind of interesting. But everybody else was excited. There were newspaper articles, there were magazine articles. You could buy a talking G.I. Joe astronaut right here. Or you could build your own spacecraft and fly it around your living room. I mean, it's just incredible buzz. Space was the thing. It was the cool thing to be involved with. Again, I say everybody. I just saw this recently, so this really cracks me up. This was in a British newspaper, and it was talking about this woman's diary. She just found her diary. She says, her diary for the day that someone landed on the moon. I went to the arts centre by myself, in yellow cords and blouse. That was very hip in the 60s. Ian was there, but he didn't speak to me. Got rhyme put in my handbag from someone who's apparently got a crush on me. It's Nicholas, I think. Ugh, man landed on moon. So I guess teenagers were always teenagers. So what's going on today? I think it's just as exciting as ever. I think this is an incredibly exciting and interesting time as far as space is concerned. We've got all these different ventures trying to get involved with space tourism, trying to invent new ways of taking astronauts to the space station and beyond. We've got new low orbit vehicles and others, people like Sierra Nevada, Boeing, Virgin. They're all getting in on this space race for the next step. Now, what do? Well, talking of the International Space Station, what I do is related to the International Space Station. So as you probably know, the International Space Station is this giant sort of orbiting space lab. It's about the size of a football field. The bit in the middle, the accommodation bit, is about the size of a 6-bedroomed house. It orbits the Earth every 91 minutes. It's had 250 plus residents. There are typically 6 astronauts on the space station at any given time, and they come from a variety of different countries. In fact, the astronauts that are up there right now, one of the astronauts is Italian, and Samantha Cristoforino. And when she was going to the space station, she said, "I am not going to the space station and drinking that coffee," being Italian. And this is a true story. She said, "I am not going and drinking that coffee. I'm just not." So Lavazza, which is the Italian coffee maker, made an espresso machine for her. They spent I don't know how much money, and they made this thing, and I have to say I've seen this thing, and it looks like a box with a big plastic ziplock on the front, out of which comes some disgusting looking thing that's supposed to be coffee. It really looks more like, to be honest, a colostomy bag than, than an espresso machine. But Lavazza made it, so they put their logo on it, so that looks cool. And it is called the, instead of the espresso machine, the ISS, International Space Station, espresso machine. Oh. So that went up recently. When she went up in November 2014, that went up with her. So it's got a little bit better up there. Now, the space station used to be, people used to get to and from the space station with the space shuttle. So the space shuttle was this huge program. You all have heard of the space shuttle. You've probably seen many of the launches. And the space shuttle made about 135 missions from 1981 to 2011. But in 2011, NASA decided it was going to close down the program. And the reason for that, at least the official reason given, was that they wanted to concentrate on deep space. They weren't interested in what they call near space, which is where the space station is. So they wanted to put out for tender, for bid, the trips to and from the space station, amongst other things. So they put it out for private companies. So there are currently 2 companies that are resupplying the space station. And those 2 companies are SpaceX, which is the company owned by Elon Musk. He's the Tesla car guy. And the other one is Orbital, or as they are, as of 2 days ago, Orbital ATK. And those are the 2 companies that won the bids to resupply the International Space Station. And I am working with Orbital. So my connection is that I'm involved with Orbital and with the Antares rocket. So there are these 2 things. Dragon is actually not the rocket is Falcon. Dragon is this part. Dragon is the part that takes the equipment and so on to the space station. And the focus for SpaceX right now is that they want to take equipment to the space station, so experiments, supplies, food, anything that they need, and then they want to be able to return the vehicles so that they're ultimately working towards being able to take astronauts in this. Our focus at Orbital is a different focus. We take stuff to the space station in exactly the same way. Our capsule, there's this Dragon, our capsule is called CYGNUS and sits up here. We want to take stuff to the space station, but we want to then have our capsule emptied. The astronauts fill it with their trash, and we bring it back, and it breaks up on re-entry. So we get rid of their trash. We're a waste refuse service for the space station, basically. So we take stuff out and then we bring trash back. So we have got two different end aims, but right now we're taking it in turns. Dragon has a launch, we have a launch, Dragon has a launch. And what I'm looking at, of course, is acoustics. Now this all takes place, the launches for Antares are right here in Virginia. So Orbital is based just outside Dulles Airport, and the launches take place on the eastern shore of Virginia. This is actually right near Chincoteague, if any of you know where that is. And this is Wallops Island, and this is what was once a very small launch facility. It used to mostly launch sounding rockets, weather balloons, weather rockets, that kind of thing. And they got the contract about 5 years ago. Orbital said, if we're going to resupply the space station, we need somewhere to launch from. And they decided they wanted to keep the money in Virginia, so they decided that they would really build up this. So between 2009 and 2011, they built a second big pad. So they had the little pad that they'd been launching the sounding rockets and others, and they built a second big pad. And the big pad is right here in the front. And that's where they've been launching the Antares rocket from. So what happens is the Antares rocket is the big part on the outside. This part here, CYGNUS, is the part that actually goes to the space station. This is the capsule with all the stuff in, and it has about a ton capacity. So this gets packed up with all the stuff, and then this is put in here, and then this whole thing is the launch vehicle. The launch vehicle has two engines, two liquid oxygen kerosene fueled engines, AJ26 engines, and this launches it initially. Then there is a separation. Then this top bit goes on, and this top bit is propelled by an ATK caster rocket. ATK is the company that has just been bought by Orbital, just merged with Orbital. And this is sent on a bit further, and then eventually this bit comes off, and CYGNUS goes into orbit and is propelled itself, and it has a couple of solar panels which will also help it propel. It gets in sync with the space station, gets about 10 meters from the space station grabs it and docks it. So that's the launch sequence. This is what it looks like. This is me in front of not the actual one, the mock-up one. So this is the size of it. These are the solar panels. This is it, the CYGNUS part being mated with the Antares rocket. This is the whole thing going out onto the launch pad. The cargo part is here, and this is it on the pad ready to launch. And I work on the vibroacoustics. So vibroacoustics are vibration caused by acoustics. So loud noises causing vibrations, particularly at liftoff. This is when there's the biggest problem, because the rocket vibrates, the pad, there's problems with the equipment on the pad, the payload itself vibrates, and you're afraid of causing damage. All sorts of things can go wrong at that point. And so we're interested in looking at what is the primary noise sources, or what are the primary noise sources, and why? Can we do anything about them? When are they? What sources are causing the most problems at what points during the launch? And as I said, can we do anything about it? So that's how I'm involved. So what we do is we do beamforming experiments. So this is a set of 70 microphones. So these microphones are very, very expensive. So what do you do with very, very expensive microphones? You put them out where there's sand and sea and rain and stuff coming off rockets. So this is what it looks like. This is about 10 feet by 10 feet. This is the front face. You can't see because of the reflection, but in there, on these positions, are all the microphones. So there are 70 microphones. There are 56 that come out in a sort of a logarithmic spiral, and then there's the remaining 14 are in these corners, and they're placed in these corners determined by other ellipses. And the positions of the microphones are extremely important. There's a lot of mathematics that goes behind this. This is called a beamforming array. We put this great big thing, each microphone's got cords coming out, we put this great big thing up on a scissor lift, we put it 40 feet in the air, about 400 feet from the launch. We put all the wires all the way down here into this little building, and that's where all the censoring and everything, censoring equipment is. And then we leave it there for a couple of days because you have to be away from the launch pad for a significant amount of time before they launch. And we cover it with stuff, hoping it'll be okay, and then there's a launch, and then we hope we collect data. We've also got cameras right in the middle here. We've got an infrared camera, an accelerometer, and all sorts of other equipment. And so we're trying to capture the acoustics, what's going on. Now, there are other things going on. It's not like we just say, okay, we'll send this thing up and it'll make a noise and that'll be that. So there are attempts to do things to quieten it down. One of the things is to use water. So this is the launch pad. The rocket sits on top of here. So the bottom of the rocket will be up here. The rocket will sit on here. And as the engine ignition starts, there's water being pumped in here. This trench is designed to funnel the rocket exhaust. So the rocket's sitting on here. As it goes up, the exhaust is supposed to funnel down this trench. And this trench has all this water in it as well. And there are also these things called rainbirds. So in many of the pictures, you could see a big tall water tower, and that fuels these two things. And these things furiously spray water onto the concrete launch pad as soon as the rocket takes off to try and drench the sound, and also to keep the launch pad cool, because the launch pad gets incredibly hot. Something of an understatement. So, this is the situation. This tower is supplying the rainbirds. This is the vehicle that you actually saw the rocket coming out on. This vehicle brings the rocket out, and then it puts the rocket upright, and then it falls away at launch. So this falls away at an angle of about 10 degrees. The rocket doesn't launch vertically. It launches at about 10 degrees too. So the erector launcher falls like this, the rocket launches like this, to ensure that there's no interference. And this again is our experiment. So this was the A1 launch, the very first launch, incredibly successful. This is some experimental results that we got. I'm just going to show you briefly. These are photographs taken at the launch. And I'll show you video of a launch in just a second. These are photographs taken at a launch. These are a variety of other images, including the results of the beamforming experiments overlaid on the images. So this is an infrared camera overlaid with experiments. And where the very whitest part is where the noise sources are. So if you look at this picture with this picture, at the very beginning, the noise sources are right here at what's called the duct inlet, at the very bottom of the rocket. This is just at ignition after 6 seconds. As the rocket lifts off very slightly, you get a reflection from the ground, and so you get it seems like two noise sources. Then all of a sudden, the exhaust goes down that big trench I showed you, and this is where the noise is coming from. Then as the rocket lifts off the ground, so as soon as the rocket moves away, because it's not going vertically up, but it's got an angle, because there's an angle, stuff spills out over the launch pad. And so you get noise sources at the launch pad, and then finally, as the rocket takes off, all the noise sources are in here. So this had not been known before. It had not been known that the noise sources at launch were time dependent. And all the models, the model rocket noise, don't use this. They did not understand this, and so they were not using these noise sources in the right locations and not modeling them correctly. So this was huge news. This was something that I was involved with NASA Ames in California for the last couple of years, and this was a really big find for us. Another thing we found when we were doing the experiments was that, unknown to everybody, the rainbirds that pour the water on the pad weren't coming on at the right time. They were coming on too late, and that was causing a lot of problems. It was causing a lot of damage. The pad was heating up. It was causing excess noise that we needn't have had. So again, the experiments gave us a lot of useful information. All right, here's the cool part. This is a launch. So I'm going to show this launch video. What you're going to see is the module being packed, the cargo module being packed, so they're putting stuff in to take to the space station. Then they put it together with the rocket. Then they take it out onto the launch pad. They put it on the pad. They launch it. Then you'll see, when it's in the air, you'll see the separation as bits of the rocket fall off as it goes. And then you'll eventually see it comes and it sees the space station. It gets in sync with the space station, and then the space station grabs it. So you'll see this is a video of the whole sequence. I did not put the music on. Just want you to know that.
off of Antares, beginning the journey of the G. David Lowe Cygnus cargo vehicle to the International Space Station.
So there's the shoreline. First stage separation. Second stage. That's the space station seeing Cygnus. Now they're trying to grab it. Docking with the space station. And they grabbed it. So this is the that was a demo launch to make sure that everything was okay, and this is the first where we had a full cargo hold. So this first launch was on 9th of January 2014. It was supposed to be in December, and there was a problem with the space station at the time with the docking, then they had to send astronauts out to fix. And so the launch actually took place in January, but this was the launch where we sent all the Christmas presents to the astronauts. So with their families brought gifts, and they were packed into Cygnus and sent off, better late than never, I guess, to the space station. So that was our first launch. This was the second launch. This was in July of 2014, so July last year. This is taken from a different angle, but again, this was the second launch. And in between this launch, Dragon had made a launch, and they had sent equipment up as well. This was our third launch.
T-minus 30 seconds on my mark. Mark. T-minus 30.
I'm enjoying this bit. I put a long bit in the beginning when I can still look at it and enjoy it. So this is the trench. The rocket's here, and this is the trench that's supposed to get the exhaust. This is the Rainbirds with the water.
3, 2, 1. And we have liftoff of Antares. The door 3 missions that bring Cygnus on its third CRS mission to the ISS. Got main engines at 108%.
Yeah, I can't really watch this bit.
And launch team, be advised, stay at your consoles. Everyone in the LCC, maintain your positions in your consoles. In the LCC, maintain positions at your console.
I like the part where he says maintain positions at your consoles when you know that what they were really wanting to do is run like hell. So very early on in the launch, it became clear that there was a problem. And there is a guy whose job, I'm sure it's not the only part of his job, but there is a guy whose job it is to press the destruct button. And that night, that guy had to press the destruct button. So we brought the rocket back down. The rocket was going up. It was clear there was a problem with one of the engines. It has two engines. It was clear there was a problem with one of the launch engines. And so a few seconds up is the critical time. You've only got a couple of seconds in which you can bring the rocket back down, and it'll come back down vertically. Otherwise, you've got to really worry about where you're going to bring it down and what's going to happen. And even though they choose a very underpopulated area and so on, you really can only bring it down if you can bring it down vertically. So in the initial seconds of the launch, we had to blow it up. So I thought you might be interested, we have all these experiments, thought you might be interested in seeing what happened from a different perspective. This is a ground camera, one of the ground cameras. This is normal. So all this stuff is normal. Here's another camera. Coming out of the water tower and all the fuel and all the other debris, but our camera is totally cracked, as you can see. It's amazing it survived, but you can see all the water pouring out of the tower with all the other fuel and everything else. So not a great day really for the experimental equipment. Here's what it looked like the following day, or a couple of days later. So, this is the TEL, the erector piece that launched the vehicle. This is where our little cabin should have been. This is a very big hole in the ground. This is, amazingly, the fuel containers, which were amazingly, well, they were designed to be this way, but amazingly untouched. But there's a lot of other debris everywhere, as you can see. This thing was built to withstand all sorts of things. So it was damaged, but not as badly as we had anticipated. The cost of loss of equipment, this just refers to the rocket, not the payload, not the cargo load. The cargo load in itself is worth a lot of money as well, although nobody will say how much. This was the damage to the launch pad, which is very good recent news. The federal government has just kicked in a lot of money to help rebuild that, because it had brought a lot of jobs to Virginia, a lot of interest, a lot of tourism, and so good news. And this rebuild has been going on since the day after the accident, and so it's going to take about a year to rebuild the pad, and it'll be up and running for 2016, certainly, maybe before. Here's another view of the big hole. As you can see, this building is not doing too well. Lots of buildings were severely damaged, including the horizontal integration building where you integrate the rocket and CYGNUS. Actually, the worst damage was to the other pad. So this is pad 0A, which was built more recently to high specifications. 0B, the other pad, did a lot worse, the pad that was sending the sounding rockets and so on, because it had been built to much lower specifications, and it's right next door, just along here. And so that pad actually has more damage to it, which is sort of awkward. Sorry about your pad. So what caused the engine failure? Well, it was the turbo pump failure. So the analysis results I got a couple of days from, got some information a couple of days ago from Orbital. Definitely the turbo pump failure. That is what had been rumored at the time in one of the two AJ26 engines. And so the turbo pump produces high pressure fluid to go into the combustion chamber, and there was a failure in that. The engines were very old. The engines were 40 plus years old. They were built, not designed, built during the space race of the 1960s. So I showed you all that footage earlier. That's when the engines were built. And they had been bought by Aerojet, an American company, and they'd been refurbished, and they were specially used for designed and refurbished for use in Antares. There had been a couple of other failures of these rockets before, so they were being tested by NASA in Stennis last year in May timeframe. And Stennis is a NASA place where they blow stuff up just for a job, just they overstress stuff to see what will happen. And they had blown one up, or one had been blown up when it shouldn't have done last year, and that was what delayed our launch last year. So there had been one previous problem, but the ones that were on Antares had been tested and tested and tested. So. It is also true that we may never really know the root cause because there's just not enough left over. There was so much fire and explosion damage that we may never really know why they blew up, why there were the problems. I love this. Everybody's super optimistic. Everybody at Orbital, even right afterwards, said we will come back and fly here at Wallops again. The Wallops people, even though we blew up their other pad, said there's no doubt in my mind we will rebound stronger than ever. Orbital, we intend to move forward. Prior to the accident, they've been looking for new engines. We intend to move forward. We're going to keep on looking for our new engines. And I like NASA. Space is hard. That was supportive in their own NASA way. Space is hard. So Orbital has purchased these new engines, these new RD-181 engines. One of the requirements was that they would go into the same plane as the engines that were already on Antares. They don't want to have to totally redesign Antares. These will do that. Orbital also bought an Atlas V rocket to potentially do a fall launch to the space station. Obviously they feel bad because all the stuff that was supposed to go to the space station in October didn't go. So SpaceX did the next launch to make sure that the space station was properly resupplied. And now Orbital's going to make up their launches. So instead of doing 8 launches, they're going to do 7 launches, but with a bigger payload. Because when you negotiate this kind of thing, it's based on volume of payload, not number of launches. And so they're going to have a higher volume in payload of the upcoming launches to make up for the deficit in the contract. Orbital, as I said, 2 days ago, merged with ATK. ATK made the motors for all the space shuttles. So ATK is a big player in the aerospace field, and Orbital has just merged with them as well. So that's also an exciting new thing that we're doing. I should mention, in case seeing my last couple of videos didn't convince you that rocket science isn't straightforward, here's a couple of other things that have happened. This was Hurricane Sandy. We had just got the first rocket onto the pad, and the weather people said, the weather's changed, there's a hurricane coming. Because we had integrated the first stage, we didn't have a building big enough at the time to take this off the pad and put it in a building. And we didn't have the time to get it into a building. The building we could have put it in was too far away. All the nearby buildings were too small. So we could not get it off the pad. So it stood on the pad throughout Hurricane Sandy. And it was extraordinarily nerve-wracking, as you can imagine. You can see how much it took away of the coastline. So the pad is right here. And this was the coastline before, and this is the coastline afterwards. So the coastline really did take a hit. It's not like it didn't come anywhere near us. It did about 4 months worth of damage, but amazingly, all the integral parts of the structure still remain. So we were super lucky with Hurricane Sandy. Another launch we did when the pad was first opened was the Lunar Atmosphere, Dust and Environment Explorer, the Lady rocket. And this rocket was launched from Wallops on the 7th of September 2013. And this launch made national headlines for a different reason than our previous launch that I just showed you. And this was because we accidentally launched a frog. So back to the frogs. This was, again, NASA, masters of understatement. The condition of the frog is uncertain, is what they released in their press report. There was a lot of speculation at the time as to whether this was a real frog or not. This shot is from an acoustically triggered camera. So the camera's on the ground, and it's triggered by acoustic waves. So it's triggered at the launch by sound. So there was no way this could have been interfered with. And as I say, this poor little amphibian just got a little bit too close and became the first frog in space, first known frog in space. So as a frog monitor, I took it pretty badly. Ex-frog monitor, I guess. Okay, what next? I think this is a really interesting and exciting time for rocket science. So there's all these, as I mentioned earlier, all these new private ventures, and NASA's interested in deep space, but there's so much going on with corporations like Sierra Nevada and Virgin Galactic and so on, that I really think that what's going on with them is hugely fascinating. And I think ultimately they'll move more boundaries maybe than NASA is at the moment. I think humans will go back to the moon. These are just my ideas. I think humans will go back to the moon. I think, of course, they'll go to Mars. There's a surprising, and in my mind, disturbing number of people who volunteered to go to Mars. I'm not sure, however interested I am in space, that that's really for me. But they will go to Mars. I don't doubt that. I think that China and India will become major space nations. They're doing more and more all the time in this direction. There's a lot of collaboration going on. So I think that they will really become big players. The future of the space station is uncertain. There was a contract recently signed for up to 2024. So up until 2024, the Americans are still going to be involved in the space station along with 4 or so other nations. But after that, it's unknown. It's very hard for us to imagine keeping it going because it's an old lady. But on the other hand, it's hard to imagine not having the space station. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. You can all be part of this. Well, maybe not all of you, but most of you. Those of you that are under 70 can probably be part of this. So this is incredibly exciting. I accidentally got into this. I always loved science, but this really wasn't something that I really wanted to get into. But I kind of took all these different paths and accidentally got into it. And I've loved every minute of it. And you guys could be involved in this too. All you have to remember is keep calm. It's only rocket science. Thank you very much.